Daemon Targaryen tightening his grip on King's Landing, his fated Harrenhal, and Rhaenyra finally claiming the Iron Throne. This was everything Daemon had ever fought for. And what an incredible episode it was, reminding us exactly why Game of Thrones became one of the greatest fantasy series ever made. This episode of House of the Dragon doesn't just carry the emotional weight of the previous episode, it proves how brilliant writing can turn even the simplest moments into scenes that stay with the audience forever. Titled Queen's Landing, this episode delivers exactly what its name promises. Right from the opening sequence, the updated intro reflects the aftermath of the Battle of the Gullet. We witness the devastating consequences of the battle, Corlys Velaryon's desperate fight and the heartbreaking death of Jacaerys Velaryon. The episode itself begins amid the burning wreckage of the Triarchy fleet, with flames consuming ships and soldiers alike. As we saw in the previous episode, after Alice River's warning, Adam, Hugh, and Ulf left Harrenhal on their dragons and joined the battle at the Gullet. Although Rhaenyra's forces emerged victorious, this was the kind of victory that felt almost indistinguishable from defeat. The price was simply too high, leaving Rhaenyra unable to celebrate what should have been one of her greatest triumphs. The Battle of the Gullet didn't just cripple Rhaenyra's cause, it changed the course of the war. The Velaryon fleet, the backbone of her naval power, was left in ruins. With its destruction, Rhaenyra lost control of the seas, leaving her vulnerable to future attacks from the coast. But the greatest blow of all was the death of her heir, Jacaerys Velaryon, a loss no victory could ever make up for. The Blacks also suffered the loss of a dragon, while the Velaryon's ancestral seat, High Tide on Driftmark, was devastated during the conflict. Ironically, the only side that truly benefited from this battle was the Greens. They suffered virtually no direct losses. The Triarchy fleet was shattered after its brutal clash with the Velaryons, and the long-standing threat around the Stepstones was finally eliminated. In a way, the Greens gained the strategic advantage without paying the terrible price the Blacks did. That's why Corlys Velaryon's heartbreaking line carries so much weight. If this is victory, then I pray I never win another battle. Even after such unimaginable losses, Corlys still has his granddaughter Baela Targaryen by his side. And perhaps most importantly, the legendary Sea Snake himself survived. But the one person who didn't make it home was Jacaerys Velaryon. In the eyes of the grieving queen, the blame falls squarely on the shoulders of her Lord Commander of the Queensguard, Ser Laurent Marbrand. And before we talk about Emma Darcy's phenomenal performance as Rhaenyra in this episode, let's first take a closer look at Ser Laurent and the role he plays in this devastating tragedy. Before Ser Laurent took command of the Queensguard, the position belonged to Ser Steffon Darklyn, whose fate was sealed during the attempt to claim Sea Smoke. Now the burden falls on Ser Laurent. Ignoring the Queen's orders has led to devastating consequences, and he stands before Rhaenyra carrying the weight of his failure. Before leaving for King's Landing, Rhaenyra even remarks that someone should ask Ser Laurent how he wishes to die, a chilling reminder of just how furious and heartbroken she has become. However, if the books are anything to go by, Ser Laurent's story is far from over. Then comes one of the most heartbreaking moments of the episode, Rhaenyra finally seeing Jacaerys' body. For any parent, this is an unimaginable nightmare, and Emma Darcy delivers an absolutely phenomenal performance here. Their portrayal captures grief, rage, and helplessness so perfectly that the entire scene becomes emotionally overwhelming. Moments like this prove why House of the Dragon continues to excel in its casting. From Paddy Considine's unforgettable King Viserys, to Matt Smith's commanding presence as Daemon, and now Emma Darcy's deeply emotional performance as Rhaenyra, the cast consistently elevates every scene they are in. Rhaenyra also learns exactly what happened during the Battle of the Gullet. She's told that an unknown dragon rider arrived on the wild dragon Sheepstealer, and that the chaos surrounding that arrival ultimately led to Jacaerys' death. That revelation doesn't just explain the tragedy, it also plants the seeds for major developments still to come. This revelation also makes Rhaenyra's future reaction much clearer. Once she discovers that the mysterious rider was actually Rhaena Targaryen, forgiveness is going to be the last thing on her mind. From Rhaenyra's perspective, Jacaerys' death will always be tied to that moment, making the emotional fallout almost inevitable. But the person whose reaction might be even more fascinating is Daemon Targaryen. In Fire and Blood, the writer of Sheepstealer isn't Rhaena, it's a young girl named Nettles, someone who shares a deep and complicated bond with Daemon. The show has clearly reimagined that storyline by giving Rhaena Nettles' role. Earlier in the episode, Daemon even says that Sheepstealer, a wild dragon, cannot simply be claimed like any ordinary dragon. So when he eventually learns that the impossible was accomplished not by a stranger, but by his own daughter, it won't just come as a shock, it will likely become one of his proudest moments. This change also gives the series a perfect opportunity to strengthen the relationship between Demon and Rena. She's the daughter who once believed her father loved Bela more than her simply because she didn't have a dragon of her own. Now, after achieving what almost no one thought was possible, Rena finally has the chance to earn the recognition she's longed for her entire life. It also explains why Rhaenyra's relationship with Rena could become far more complicated moving forward. In the book, Rhaenyra never trusted Nettles. By replacing Nettles with Rena, the show creates a much more personal conflict, one that feels emotionally stronger and fits naturally into the story's new direction. Rena is currently taking refuge in the Vale, where she remains under the protection of Lady Jane Arryn. It may seem like a small detail now, but this storyline is clearly being set up to come full circle later in the season. Now, let's talk about Daemon Targaryen, because in my opinion, he's the true standout of this episode. While Daemon is celebrating the victory at the Red Fork alongside the Rivermen and his allies, the moment he receives news from Dragonstone, he wastes no time. He immediately sets off, knowing the war has entered a far more dangerous phase. With Daemon leaving Harrenhal, the main army begins marching toward King's Landing, leaving Harrenhal defended by only a small garrison. It's a risky decision, and Daemon knows it. Holding such a massive castle with so few soldiers is practically inviting trouble, and before long, that decision starts to have consequences. You may have also noticed a woman standing among the Rivermen, with black markings around her eyes. That's Alysanne Blackwood, better known as Black Aly. She's one of the most important Blackwood characters during the Dance of the Dragons, and although her role is only briefly introduced here, she'll become much more significant as the story unfolds. When Daemon finally arrives at Dragonstone, he's surprised to find Ulf and Hugh already there. Almost instantly, he realizes what their arrival means. Harrenhal is now exposed. At the same time, Daemon understands why they fled. He's experienced the overwhelming terror of facing Vhagar himself, so he can't completely blame them for retreating. Even so, another concern lingers in the back of his mind. Daemon still isn't convinced that Alicent will keep the promise she made to Rhaenyra, but with Vhagar absent from King's Landing, he knows this may be the perfect opportunity to strike and finally seize the capital. There's also a brief but meaningful interaction between Daemon and Mysaria, and it carries more weight than it might seem at first. We already know that Mysaria was once Daemon's lover before the two eventually parted ways. More importantly, Daemon understands better than anyone that Mysaria is never driven by loyalty. Every move she makes is carefully calculated to serve her own interests. And the feeling is mutual. Mysaria has never truly trusted or cared for Daemon either. This small exchange quietly hints at how much influence Mysaria could have on Daemon's future decisions as the story progresses. But Daemon himself is no longer the same man. After the visions he experienced at Harrenhal last season, he's seen what lies ahead. When he speaks to the grieving Rhaenyra, he's not just comforting her, he's preparing her for what's coming next. He's urging her to focus on the future and to take King's Landing, no matter how painful the cost has been. One of the episode's strongest themes is Daemon's new perspective. His thoughts are no longer centered only on the present, they're fixed on the future, on Daenerys Targaryen, and on the prophecy of a Song of Ice and Fire. He understands that every decision Rhaenyra makes today will echo through history, eventually leading to Daenerys and the return of dragons. As heartbreaking as Jacaerys' death is, Rhaenyra can't afford to stop. She doesn't have the luxury of grieving forever. If she wants to protect the future she now believes in, she must continue the war, seize King's Landing, and fight for the destiny that stretches far beyond her own lifetime. Meanwhile, the story shifts to King's Landing. As Aemon Targaryen departs the capital aboard Vhagar, the responsibility of overseeing the city temporarily falls to Queen Helaena, setting the stage for another crucial turning point in the war. Although Queen Helaena is left in charge of King's Landing, she's still under the guidance of her mother, Alicent Hightower. One scene shows Alicent instructing the commander of the City Watch to allow Rhaenyra's forces into the city. Personally, this is one of the few moments that felt unnecessary. The series has already established that no matter who sits on the Iron Throne, the City Watch, better known as the Gold Cloaks, have always been fiercely loyal to their former commander, Daemon Targaryen. After all, it was Daemon who transformed the City Watch into the disciplined force they are today and gave them their iconic gold cloaks. Their loyalty to him has been part of the story from the very beginning, and we'll see that loyalty matter again as the war unfolds. Because of that, Alicent personally convincing the commander to stand aside doesn't really add much. The Gold Cloaks already had every reason to support Daemon and, by extension, Rhaenyra's cause. An even more questionable moment comes with Jasper Wilde, the Master of Laws. His confrontation with Alicent feels just as unnecessary, especially considering how quickly his story comes to an end. Known in the books as Iron Rod, Jasper Wilde is a far more colorful character than the show lets on. Fire and Blood even mentions that he fathered 29 children across 4 wives, a detail that perfectly captures his larger-than-life reputation. Unfortunately for him, none of that legacy can save him once the political tides begin to turn. And perhaps the Greens should be grateful that Grand Maester Orwyle is still alive. Had Aemon executed him in the previous episode, as it briefly seemed he might, the chaos inside King's Landing could have become even worse. Now let's move to Aemon Targaryen. Aemon has finally arrived at Harrenhal, where Ser Criston Cole and his army spot him from a distance before advancing toward the castle. At the same time, the Rivermen and the seasoned Greybeards are marching from the opposite direction. A clash between these two forces now feels inevitable. As for Harrenhal itself, Aemon gives the castle the one thing it's always known best: destruction. Of course, Harrenhal has already survived the Dragonfire of Balerion the Black Dread during Aegon the Conqueror's invasion. Compared to that, even Vagar's flames are just another scar on a castle that's been cursed for generations. The moment Aemon arrives, he wipes out the small force Daemon had left behind to defend Harrenhal. Among the dead is Ser Simon Strong, the loyal Castellan who had faithfully kept the castle under Daemon's control. The episode also includes a clever visual parallel. Just like Daemon did before him, Aemon enters Harrenhal carrying Blackfire, the legendary sword of Aegon the Conqueror. It's a subtle way of showing that Aemon sees himself as the rightful heir to Aegon's legacy. But Harrenhal never lets anyone leave unchallenged. Simon Strong's men don't surrender without a fight, and Aemon is wounded during the struggle. That injury leads him to the one person who once helped Daemon secure the loyalty of the Riverlords, Alys Rivers. Now Aemon finds himself standing before an older, mysterious woman, and if you've been paying attention, you'll recognize exactly what the show is hinting at. Just as Alys Rivers became deeply connected to Daemon's journey at Harrenhal, she's now beginning a new and far more dangerous chapter with Aemon. The parallels are deliberate, and they could completely reshape Aemon's path from this point forward. Before Daemon left Harrenhal, Alys Rivers made one final request. She wanted him to ask the Queen to grant her Harrenhal. But Daemon dismissed the idea immediately, reminding her that she had no noble name, no title, and no noble husband. In the eyes of Westeros, that meant she had no claim to the castle. Now, however, a powerful noble stands before her once again. That small exchange feels less like a coincidence and more like the beginning of Alys' next move. Her story is clearly far from over. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra has reached a breaking point. She's no longer willing to hear her council question every decision she makes. After everything she's endured to become queen, her patience has all but disappeared. This is the woman King Viserys personally chose as his heir. From childhood, she was given a seat on the small council and trained to rule the Seven Kingdoms. She spent her entire life preparing for the Iron Throne. And yet, now that she's finally queen, every decision she makes is challenged. Even worse, there were moments when her own son doubted her judgment. It's the weight of all these betrayals, losses, and constant challenges that continues to push Rhaenyra closer to her limits. But as difficult as things have already been, her greatest trials are still ahead. Finally, Rhaenyra arrives at King's Landing aboard Syrax, with Daemon riding Caraxes, Ulf on Silverwing, and Hugh mounted on Vermithor. With 4 dragons circling the skies above the capital, the outcome is almost inevitable. At that moment, King's Landing belongs to Rhaenyra, but taking King's Landing is only half the battle. The real challenge is securing the Red Keep, because until someone sits on the Iron Throne, they can't truly be called the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. And this is where Daemon Targaryen proves exactly why he's one of the most dangerous men in Westeros. Everyone fears Daemon when he's riding Caraxes, but this episode reminds us that he's even more terrifying on foot. While Rhaenyra advances toward the Red Keep, Daemon clears the path ahead, navigating every obstacle with precision. There comes a moment when it looks as though their entire plan is about to fall apart. Then the balance shifts. One surprising detail is the reaction when Rhaenyra draws her sword. Some still underestimate her simply because she's a woman, even though their own king, Aegon II, is barely in any condition to stand, let alone rule. That arrogance becomes one of the Green's greatest weaknesses. The turning point, however, comes the instant Daemon recognizes the City Watch commander, Ser Luther. From that very moment, the atmosphere changes. The Goldcloaks know exactly who Daemon is, and more importantly, Daemon knows them. That single interaction says everything about the influence he still holds over King's Landing. You may have also noticed that Daemon immediately recognizes Ulf, and Ulf addresses him as the Rogue Prince, another reminder of the reputation Daemon has built over the years. His grip on the capital has always been extraordinary. It's the same influence that once allowed Blood and Cheese to infiltrate the Red Keep in his name. That's what makes Daemon so terrifying. His greatest weapon isn't just Caraxes, it's the loyalty, fear, and respect he commands. And moments like this make it clear that Daemon might not have needed dragons at all to help Rhaenyra take King's Landing. Now comes the episode's biggest surprise: Ser Otto Hightower. Ever since Aegon II stripped Otto of the position of Hand of the King, he had seemingly vanished without a trace. Later, Aemond even tells Larys Strong to bring his grandfather back while Ser Criston Cole is away from King's Landing. But this episode reveals something far more shocking. When Daemon orders the release of the lords and ladies who had been imprisoned simply for supporting Rhaenyra after King Viserys' death, he discovers someone nobody expected to find: Otto Hightower himself. The Season 2 finale briefly hinted that Otto was being held captive somewhere, but no one expected him to be imprisoned inside the Red Keep all along. For Daemon, finding Otto in chains is almost poetic. After all, if there's one man who can be blamed for setting the Dance of the Dragons in motion, it's Otto Hightower. Otto always feared Daemon, not because Daemon lacked ability, but because he was the one man no one could control. That's exactly why Daemon earned the title the Rogue Prince. Determined to keep Daemon away from the Iron Throne, Otto convinced King Viserys I to name Rhaenyra as his heir. Later, he placed Alicent Hightower at Viserys' side, and the moment Aegon was born, Otto began laying the groundwork to crown him king instead. Looking back, almost every major decision that fueled this civil war can be traced back to Otto's political ambitions. In many ways, his determination to prevent Daemon from becoming king became the spark that ignited the entire Dance of the Dragons. To be fair, there's no denying one thing: Otto Hightower was one of the greatest hands of the King Westeros had ever seen. He served not only King Viserys I, but also the legendary King Jaehaerys I, and during Viserys' long decline, Otto was the one who kept the realm stable and prevented the kingdom from falling into complete chaos. That's exactly why this moment carries so much emotional weight. Even Rhaenyra understands that executing Otto isn't about revenge, it's about duty. This is the true price of wearing the crown. Sitting on the Iron Throne doesn't just mean ruling a kingdom, it means making impossible decisions and carrying out judgments you never wanted to make. Otto himself accepts his fate. He tells Daemon to let it end. And while Daemon has wanted Otto dead for years, he knows this execution cannot belong to him. It has to be Rhaenyra's. To make that burden a little easier, Daemon hands her dark sister, the legendary Valyrian steel sword once wielded by Visenya Targaryen, Aegon the Conqueror's fearless sister. A blade of Valyrian steel is capable of delivering an almost effortless, clean strike in experienced hands. But Rhaenyra is not an experienced swordswoman. Her hand hesitates. The weight of the moment is almost unbearable. Yet despite her fear and hesitation, she does what every ruler eventually must. She brings Ser Otto Hightower's story to an end. Moments later, Daemon personally executes Jasper Ironrod Wild, removing the last major voice of resistance inside the Red Keep. And then comes the defining image of the episode. Rhaenyra walks toward the Iron Throne, her path marked by the blood of the men whose choices helped plunge Westeros into civil war. For the first time, the crown is finally within her reach, but the cost of claiming it has never been clearer. Before wrapping up, I have to give credit to the cast, because every major performance in this episode was outstanding. Rhys Ifans portrays Otto Hightower with remarkable restraint. Without saying much, he conveys defeat, regret, and the realization that his political game has finally come to an end. Matt Smith once again reminds us why Daemon is such a compelling character. He perfectly captures the role of a battle-hardened warrior whose only goal is to lead his queen all the way to the Iron Throne. And then there's Emma Darcy. The journey to the Iron Throne itself tells the story. Every step Rhaenyra takes feels heavy, as if the throne demands a sacrifice before it can ever be claimed. Emma doesn't need long speeches to sell that emotion, the performance speaks for itself. That said, I do have one criticism. Personally, I felt the show portrayed Rhaenyra as a little too vulnerable in this episode. This is the same Rhaenyra who stood before Vermithor, claimed new dragon riders, and challenged Aemon Targaryen without fear. After losing 2 sons and having her birthright stolen following her father's death, I expected to see her enter King's Landing with even greater determination and authority. Another choice that felt unnecessary was the repeated physical suffering inflicted on Alicent. At this point, it doesn't add much to her character and begins to feel repetitive rather than meaningful. Still, one thing becomes crystal clear. The moment Alicent sees her father Otto's severed head in the Red Keep, whatever remained of the bond she once shared with Rhaenyra is finally destroyed. Any lingering hope of reconciliation dies in that instant. And if there's one character who walks away from this episode with everything he ever wanted, it's Daemon Targaryen. King's Landing has fallen, Rhaenyra stands before the Iron Throne, and the future he's fought for is finally becoming reality. For Daemon, this may well have been the greatest day of his life. And that's a wrap on House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 2. This was easily one of the most intense episodes of the series. Even without a full-scale battle, the tension never dropped for a single moment. That's what makes the world of Westeros so unforgettable. Every conversation, every decision, and every betrayal can change history. With Rhaenyra finally taking King's Landing, all eyes now turn to Harrenhal. The next chapters are set to explore Aemon's fate, Rhaenyra's journey with Sheepstealer, Aegon's future, and some of the biggest events of the Dance of the Dragons, including Butcher's Ball, Tumbleton, and much more. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this episode? And which moment was your absolute favorite? Let me know in the comments below. I read as many of your comments as I can. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Loreflick, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next House of the Dragon breakdown. Your support really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more epic fantasy content. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, the Dance of the Dragons has only just begun.